This episode was sponsored by the Geopolitical Insight and Education Foundation. Want to find out more? Check the link in our show notes.
Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you do recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here. And as I've said, far too many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are very interested in anything that has to do with technology. And yes, it's regulation. So, this is another episode of the series that we are setting up with the GIEF, the Geopolitical Insight and Education Foundation. And so, I'm going to be introducing our two guests that have been, one is the head of the center basically, and the other one is someone who's been collaborating with it. So welcome on the podcast, Ben Fiorio and Sam Illingworth. Great to see you.
Thanks very much, Rosie. And Jack.
Always a pleasure to see you, Ben. Always a pleasure. And yes, as you said, we're actually here. It's today's two of us because Jack has joined me today. So I'm very happy because I don't feel lonely anymore. Thank you, Jack.
Hi, Rosie.
Great to see you. Okay, so I think our listeners kind of have an idea why you're here, Ben, because I've basically said it, but also they've been seeing you now for 3 episodes, so they basically know all of your biography by now. But I'm gonna turn over to our new guest, basically, and the focus of this conversation. Hi, Sam. Maybe you can tell us something about yourself and maybe explain to our listeners why you're here, what kind of career brought you to this point.
Hi, Rosie. Hi, Jack. And hi, Ben, and indeed listeners. My name's Sam. I'm a full professor in critical AI literacy at Edinburgh Napier University. And what that basically means is that I research and teach around how to use AI, and in particular, how we can use AI in a way that doesn't discourage, disparage, or discredit diverse populations of people using these tools. Very briefly, my background, I have a PhD in atmospheric physics, and then I did the logical step of spending 2 years in Japan looking at the intersections between science and theatre before coming back to the UK and embarking on an academic career that looked at how we could use poetry to democratize science and give voice to marginalized communities. And then in around 2022, when ChatGPT came out, I realized that this was a really amazing tool, but that sadly would lead to the potential exasperation or widening of the digital divide between those people and students who had access to high-speed models, frontier tools, and high-speed internet, and those that didn't. So for the past, what is that now, four odd years, my work's really been solely focused on listening to students about how they're actually using AI rather than assuming how they might be. And we've just wrapped the UK's largest qualitative research project, which was funded by the Leverhulme Trust, that surveyed over 7,000 students on their actual AI use. And what was really interesting for me is that the majority of the students are not using AI tools to cheat the majority of the time, and that actually they're using it for very different ways, which we wouldn't know about if we didn't listen. So absolutely thrilled to be on this podcast with students and people who speak for students as well, because I think, unfortunately, they're voices that are often overlooked in the discourse around artificial intelligence and education.
And maybe at the beginning we can ask you, Ben, if you could tell us why you think this commentary, which is called Reclaiming Human Skills as Core Skills in the Age of AI, is important for the series of the GIEF.
Sure, of course. So I think that the right place to start is in understanding, as I'm sure that Sam will take us through, where the idea of soft skills came from. So without wanting to go too deeply into that just yet, the highest level of the question around this reclaiming human skills idea is that empathy and discernment and judgment, these critical skills that the machines don't as yet have been undervalued. And as we see AI and AI agents being deployed into courts, schools, government agencies, making serious, very, very real world decisions about who gets benefits, about who might get medical treatment, what the triage looks like. There's a really worrying question about whether there's a human in the loop, and often cases there isn't already, and why we're outsourcing and how we're outsourcing that critical judgment for the sake of efficiency. So, of course, it's a democratic question, first and foremost, in our perspective. And that's why we're so grateful that Sam has contributed and collaborated with us on this, I think, highly important piece. Because if we lose the ability to discern, to use our judgment, and to ensure that we're not being governed by algorithms, but rather by people using their judgment, this is the very definition of losing our democracies. So it's very timely, and the window for acting on it might be quite small indeed.
And I'm going to go back to you, Sam. So I'll list them out, these abilities that are fundamental, the pillars of democracy. And the reason why I use the word pillar is because it's something very hard technically. So let's go from that. So there are judgment, empathy, critical reasoning, discernment, the willingness to be persuaded by evidence, and the courage to refuse to be persuaded by power. And you obviously, in the article that we cited before, you call them soft skills because that's how people usually call them in general in the everyday life. That's how companies define them. Why is the wording soft skills wrong, and why maybe the wording pillar would be much more appropriate for these kind of abilities?
No, absolutely. So the term soft skill itself actually comes from a 1972 training conference at Fort Bliss in Texas, where there was a psychologist called, I think it was Paul Whitmore. And basically, he presented a framework for the US Army's Continental Army Command that divided skills into hard and soft. And hard skills were basically skills that involved machines and machinery, and soft skills were skills that involved humans. I like to think probably because humans are soft in comparison to, like, literally soft to touch in comparison to the hard nature of machines. And it wasn't meant as a derogatory term. It was meant as a literally classification to differentiate between skills that were required to fix a tank versus skills that were required to ensure effective leadership in a combat situation, to treat people with kindness, to understand how networking worked. These are extremely important and essential skills. Unfortunately, the discourse around soft skills over the past 50 years has moved towards soft being seen as a euphemism for lesser. And a large part of this, again, unfortunately, has been aligned with soft skills being associated as feminine skills. So skills that females would traditionally be associated to have. I just want to go on record, obviously this is complete bunkum. And that is why we see those skills being mapped onto key performance indicators that don't necessarily result in higher wages versus skills that might be seen as being more hard. Now, what I think is really interesting about the age of AI is that actually those so-called soft skills, which I think are better called human skills, are at an absolute premium. AI, in many respects, has removed the moat, the technical moat for creating things. If I want to create a website, in the past, I either needed to pay someone quite a lot of money or I needed to learn the technical skills to do so. Now, as I know, because I did this the other month, I work with Claude Code, tell it what I want, and it creates something for me in an hour or so. Similarly, I'm a game designer. A lot of my work has always been around games, board games and card games. I'm a keen video gamer, but I didn't have the skills to create a video game. Now I do, or rather now I possess the tools that enabled me to do so. However, the skills that I still possess, which cannot be replicated by an AI, discernment, empathy, judgment, these are skills that in a workforce situation might traditionally have been written off as somehow lesser, but in the age of AI are almost becoming priceless. And my opinion, and even indeed the literature, would suggest that these skills have actually always been essential. It's just unfortunately they've been given a poor representation. And what we're seeing now with the advent of AI in the workforce and in the classrooms as well is that actually these are the skills that are essential graduate attributes, but that are just also essential skills for humans to cultivate, to not only become better humans, but also to be able to do their jobs in an effective manner that cannot be replicated by a machine.
I really love your description, and I really agree with the idea that soft skills have somehow transitioned into being associated with women, which are then obviously blamed if for a second they lack any of the soft skills, because that's what we should be good at doing. Although I always find it funny because judgment is one of the things that men blame women for being very lacking of, like you don't have judgment because like obviously you have a lot of emotions and stuff. And I'm not saying all men, I'm saying like generally that's the thought. And then obviously judgment is also a soft skill. So like, I don't know. There's a bit of confusion around. But I really wanted to kind of pinpoint this huge difference in the way that soft skills have been kind of portrayed, also because of their name, and in the actual reality of what these skills are. Because I feel like in the hiring sector right now, and also obviously in the kind of vocational sector, as much as the university application sector, so we're talking about who checks your application when you apply for uni, a lot of kind of employers or university applicants, they are now requiring in some way that you have hard skills in the sense that you are able to work with machines. That is AI. And less CVs are including now the ability of using your soft skills because they're much less valued, especially by AI, especially when it's used in decision-making processes. So I'm wondering, are these employers, hirers, whatever, people that intake new students, prospective employees, are they getting it completely wrong in your opinion? Should they actually value soft skills much more, or should we value the hard skill of using AI more now that AI is so important in our economy?
It's a great question. And working with AI is going to be essential. Now, I think in the next 3 years, from now for the next 3 years, the most critical skill that you can learn is translation. And that's translation between human and machine. And in order to do that effectively, you need the human skills that we've talked about previously, but you also need to have skills that ascertain what the limitations and strengths of AI tools can be. And for me, the education that most points towards this is a classics or a humanities education. And, I often use the line that the humanities are now the moat. And, I think about my own background, I have a PhD in atmospheric physics, but a lot of my work and training is actually as a poet. And the ability to closely read, the ability to look for what's not being said, the ability to evaluate against my own positionality and my own limitations are skills that are absolutely essential. And another reason why I know they're essential is two facts. So the World Economic Forum did a very interesting study where they looked at 2,900 skills for their capacity to be replaced by generative AI. Actually, no skills were determined to have been having a very high substitution capacity, but those skills rooted in human interaction, so empathy, active listening, sensory processing, they showed zero potential for substitution, zero. So that's one of the reasons why this is extremely important. The other reason, and a kind of rule of thumb that I have, is it's really interesting to look at leaders in big tech and to look at what they're doing rather than what they're saying. So if we take, for example, an organization that many people have strong feelings about, Palantir. Palantir has a CEO called Alex Karp and was founded in part by Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp have both gone on record as saying the humanities are dead. Alex Karp even did a Davos speech a year or so ago saying, don't do a humanities degree, it's a complete waste of your time. However, Peter Thiel has an undergraduate degree in philosophy from Stanford. Alex Karp has a PhD in philosophy. So why do they possess the skills that have enabled them to be successful in business? Almost certainly because they know how to apply human skills to hard problems. So I think there's a very strong case, not only through the literature, but also through looking at how different technological companies are emerging and the people that work within them, to tell us why these skills are essential and why they're going to form, for me, the bedrock of employability over the next several years.
We've been talking about what are soft skills and how are they implying in our world. But playing devil's advocate, I want to ask you, why should we care about human skills if everything will be operated by AI agents? And also, is there a link with the democratic stability, how this link works?
That's a great question. So I think we absolutely need these skills because AI is very, very good at producing output. But how can we judge if that output's any good? Can we go to another AI tool to tell us if it's good? No, because that sets up a theoretically infinite loop of self-criticality that just doesn't exist. Humans are extremely good at judgment. They're extremely good at empathy. They're extremely good at active listening. I mean, these are skills that we can develop and that we can learn and that anybody can do. And I think that we're being fed a narrative by certain elements of big tech to abandon these skills and to abandon critical thinking, because what's the point? And of course, they would tell us that because many of these organizations want us to look the other way rather than to have the necessary and difficult conversations that needed to be had around AI data centers, water consumption, energy consumption, the misappropriation of human labor, all the copyright issues. Anthropic's just been sued by a class action lawsuit for $1.5 billion in the US, handing out $3,000 per one of the 480,000 texts it was alleged to have stolen. I'd just like to point out that $1.5 billion is a drop in the ocean for a company that recently raised 14 billion and has a projected IPO of $1 trillion. So these are skills that we see by developing how to look and how to think. And anyone that says otherwise it's a sleight of hand. They want us to look the other way whilst many of these atrocities go on. In terms of the democratic issues, it's extremely important. I think data centers is a great subject to talk about. Okay, so and broadly, I want to position myself as well. I'm broadly pro AI, and I think that AI can do a lot of things extremely well. I mean, AI is a silly term, really. I mean, it's so broad and nebulous. I always make the illusion of it's like a vehicle, a bicycle, and a nuclear submarine are both a vehicle, right? Like that word doesn't really do justice to that spectrum. It's the same with AI. A chatbot where I'm using it to create caricatures to post on my LinkedIn profile versus a tool that somebody's using in a radiology department to accurately map cancer in human patients. They're both AI. They do very, very different things though. So what we need to be really careful of here is the language, and data centers, I think, are a great example of where we need to look at the broader picture. So if we look at the number of powerful frontier models, the US has, I think, 50 plus. China is second, probably with about 10 plus. The UK has 0. That's 0 frontier AI models. We used to have a lot, but then what happened was DeepMind was acquired by Google, which then brought it over into the US. Now let's look at the number of data centers. So these are the centers that train the AI models. The US, as you'd expect, has a very large number. I think it has 500 plus. Second is Germany with, I think, about 26 or something like that. Apologies, I've got these numbers slightly off, but they're within an order of magnitude. And third is the UK with 25. So we have the third largest number of data centers in the world, and we have 0 frontier models of our own. So what that means is that we are installing data centers that have an environmental cost, an ecological cost, a water consumption cost to train the tools of private companies and countries that benefit and directly increase cost of electricity and water in our own country. Now that's in the UK. You can imagine what's going to be happening in other countries where there's, let's say, less democratic discussion around the building of this infrastructure. And these are the skills for which the humanities are essential, because you need to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and to have that criticality of thought. So it's a very long answer, but I hope it answered the question.
Love that. I loved every single second of it. Indeed, I think it's a shame that our listeners can't see our faces, mine and Jack, and of course Ben's, because we were all like nodding very vehemently, like yes, yes, you said it. So thank you for that very long, but also very specific and very insightful answer. I really love the point that you made about private companies, the idea that AI used by private companies, and I'm going to say it both from the point of view of chatbots, so those are LLMs, they are actually AI systems, because the LLM is a model, but it's integrated in the system, so the interface and the interaction makes it a system, so that's one AI system. Then we have the kind of hiring system, that's also AI, that's also sometimes LLMs as well, but they are used for the purpose of hiring. And then we have other types of AI systems, for example, the one used for radiology purposes and stuff, the ones that you praised rightly so. That there is this kind of problems that they are all very much owned by private companies, and we do have publicly owned AI systems. If I'm not mistaken, there's an LLM in South Korea which speaks very good South Korean, more or less. That's it. But like, still, they tried to do their best with making it publicly owned. Do you think that then the issue of human capabilities being eroded by the massive use of AI systems is to be ascribed to the ownership of these systems? Or do you think that it's a problem linked to the technology? Because the fact that the owners are bad doesn't mean that the technology necessarily is going to cause an erosion, or is it the technology full stop?
It's a great question. So I think there's two things to pick up on here, and I genuinely try to stay clear of hyperbole, but one of the things I do worry about is I'm 42 years old. I've been through a lot of education, and I learnt how to critically think prior to the age of AI. What I worry about is, what about those students who've never learnt to critically think without the use of AI? And that leads to something called never skilling. So not learning those skills in the first instance that we can then build on. That is something that's of a worry. And but incidentally, the way that you get around that is not to ban AI, is to have open discussions and dialogues around what the benefits and limitations are of the tool. In terms of the blame, does it sit with the individual or does it sit with the company? It sits with the company, like 100%. And we can see the analogies here with the climate crisis, right? My background's also in researching the climate crisis. The climate crisis is real, it is happening. All of us have a part to play in that. But speaking honestly, I could fly between Australia and Edinburgh every day for the rest of my life, and it would have zero real impact on the environment in comparison to what ExxonMobil, Shell, national governments are doing. So in the 1990s, ExxonMobil actually worked with a marketing company to create the carbon footprint calculator so that it would shift guilt onto the individual so that people now feel individually responsible for the environment rather than because of the reprehensible actions of massive conglomerates who are obsessed with greed and money. And we can see the same thing happening with AI tools. These tools are built to be addictive. You'd have thought we would have learned our lesson with social media. We didn't. Asking someone to stop using these tools is like asking someone to stop smoking. It's very, very hard. And by placing the blame on the individual, again, similar to big tobacco, our products have some addictive possibilities, but it's the fault of that person over there who lacks the willpower to stop smoking. Maybe just don't create cigarettes in the first instance. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have AI tools, but we should have guardrails and education around them that stops that, and to stop blaming individuals for lacking the willpower. I'm full professor of critical AI literacy. I still fall foul of using AI to help me do tasks that I could and should do myself. Because what do I want to do? Do I want to do the work myself, share it with a colleague, and be told this is not very good, come up with something better? Or do I want to share it with a tool who tells me how brilliant I am and I'm 1 or 2 years away from winning the Nobel Prize? Obviously, I want to do the latter. And to think otherwise would be, well, it would be somebody who possesses far greater willpower than me. And that's really the whole point.
And can I break in there and say that that's also exactly the fear that everybody has about how this ultimately ends up being a democratic institutional resilience problem. I think if we put it into one single phrase, it would be something like trust in our democratic institutions depends on our processes being fair, understandable, visible, and human. And so it doesn't just depend on correct outcomes. And when you have the capacity through these tools to automate a hell of a lot of the work that can be tedious, to often help you get to the correct decision, or whatever that correct decision is. Let's say it's in benefits. Then it is, exactly as Sam says, irresistible for somebody in local government or even in national government or in a private company to not use that tool. And it's the very definition of a chain of dominoes. So the potential harms are where these tools, which are helpful and can be tremendously effective, are used so ubiquitously that these decisions being made, let's say in a government institution, because these are literally and explicitly meant to be democratic, has ultimately no visible author, no contestable reasoning, no feedback loop. And then the process fundamentally fails the legitimacy test. And that's ripe for causing the collapse of trust in the democratic system. And exactly as Sam says, also across so many other sectors, trust in the education system, trust in even whether companies operate by the fundamental social contract that they're often and erroneously assumed to. So the issue is just how easy and good these tools are at taking away some of the most boring tasks, but the tasks that actually need to be human legible, done by humans, so that we don't lose the human element of them.
Moving from to a more legal point of view, I wanted to ask if you think that the actual laws, like for example the EU AI Act, are able to tackle all these problems, like the erosion of soft skills that we're seeing. Uh, are they able to do that, or they are lacking some stuff?
It's such a great question. I'm gonna go all political and answer another question that you didn't ask, but which I think answers it anyway. So I've been doing a lot of work looking at GDPR and how AI tools are and are not compliant with GDPR. And for me, the two articles in GDPR that are the most important are the one around the right to remove and the one around right to have trustworthiness and honesty in something. Now, the trustworthy honesty, I think we've already covered. The right to remove article in GDPR is extremely important because AI software companies will tell you, have told you, that even for models where memory is turned off, it is impossible for them to retrieve data and remove it. So this is why it's very, very important that you think very carefully about anything you put into an AI tool. Someone always tell me the billboard test. Don't put anything into an AI tool that you wouldn't be comfortable appearing on a billboard 50 foot high as you were driving down the motorway. And we just cannot remove this information from these AI tools. So I think the law as we have it is catching up. I don't think it serves a purpose. I don't think it will ever serve a purpose. I mean, let's look at social media. We still haven't sorted out social media 20 years on. And again, the social media laws that are coming in are putting the blame on the user. Banning a 16-year-old from 15-year-old from social media is stupid. I mean, does anyone remember when I was 15, I would do anything I wanted to do. Like, a law wasn't going to stop me. I mean, I would like to point out I didn't break the law every single day at all. But, a law wouldn't have stopped me from going on to social media. It would have made me think, how can I jailbreak this piece of software to enable me to go onto social media? It's actually much easier to have guardrails in place on this software and these AI tools to protect the user than it is to ask the user to have to do it. Technically, much easier. However, the individual doesn't have billions of pounds in lobbying behind them to try to convince the government that, oh, putting in these guardrails will stop AI tools from being good enough to win the AI war race against China. Look at what China are doing. Look at China. Look over there. Look at them. Look at them. While secretly all this other stuff's happening over here. So I think the law is not fit for this work. And the other thing, I guess, this is a law podcast that's really important to look at is how people are using AI to develop laws. So I don't know if you saw the story this week that the governor of New York has decided that there's too many laws in New York, which may be the case. And they've got AI software to look through the millions of lines of legalese and to recommend which laws need to be kept and which laws need to be removed. That is so stupid because AI tools are very good at pattern recognition, of course, but AI tools also, and generative AI also operates by predicting the most predictable next step. So you can see this for yourself. If I ask Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini to summarize a 40-page policy document, it can do a really good job. It probably misses out page 42, paragraph 3, clause 1, which is where the real story is buried. And that's my worry, that people will continue to use these AI tools to gloss over very, very important things. So yeah, Jack, I didn't quite answer your question, but I hope it got around to answering it in a slightly politicized language.
Sometimes we do need a bit of politics. We know that we are a law podcast, as you said, but like, sometimes it's frustrating to read some laws and try to understand what's the politics behind them, and then being told, oh no, well, there's no politics behind them. Well, if you read the actual policy, you will find out that there's a lot of politics around them. I mean, if we only think about the social media ban that was passed by the French Assembly yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. I was just reading it today, and the law is like 5 pages long, which for a ban is very little, because you have to explain the conditions, the reasons, the way the rights will be balanced. I mean, you're still prohibiting something for a huge number of people, because children are people anyways. And I don't know, the idea that of an entire legislative proposal, they kept the first article and the reiteration of the third out of an entire legislative proposal. Come tell me that that's not political. The fact that they're in the ban, they do not include the use of chatbots because, well, France is developing Mistral and we all know it. Come tell me that's not political. So absolutely spot on answer. And yeah, I totally agree with your approach. I mean, it's unbelievable that we're not talking of it in these terms. I'm going to ask you the last question, and in that, I would like both Sam and Ben maybe to answer, because, as you know, this is a bit of a wrap up, and I wanted to make it maybe a bit more kind of incisive in terms of pace. If you had to put together in 2, max 3 sentences the message of this beautiful essay, this beautiful extract that you've written, of whose name I'm going to repeat again, Reclaiming Human Skills as Core Skills in the Age of AI, which 3 sentences would you use? And I'm going to start with Sam, and then I'm going to ask Ben to go straight afterwards.
Human skills are extremely important parts of being a human, but they're also extremely important parts of the workforce. Please do not listen to anyone that tells you that empathy, discernment, judgment, and active listening are not important. They are, and they're some of the most important skills you can have in being a human and in becoming employable over the next 3 to 5 years.
I think that's exactly right. And I would only add that the piece's argument is, I think, that this isn't just a job story. It's also fundamentally a legitimacy story. Democratic institutions, and in fact, our entire society, needs visible, accountable, contestable human reasoning to be seen as legitimate and not just to be correct. And so fundamentally, as judgment gets automated out of courts, out of schools, out of agencies, you lose the chain of reasoning a citizen can contest. And that's very dangerous, in addition to being very harmful to the workforce.
Wow. I mean, maybe let's wrap it up there. So thank you both, Sam and Bennett. I see that your soft skills are very well developed, and I would say probably for our listeners as well. Maybe it's better to be a soft human than a hard machine. Just saying. Thank you so much, both Sam and Ben, for this wonderful opportunity of discussing this very important topic. I really hope that my future employers will be listening to this podcast. Just saying. Thank you so much, Jack, as well, for helping me in this interview today.
Thank you.
Thank you both, guys.
Thank you so much, Rosie and Jack. It's always a pleasure.
And this was all for the Legal for Tech, the podcast.
This episode was brought to you in partnership with DG Beetle. DG Beetle helps privacy professionals to stay up to date with the most important European documents in the AI, data and digital space every day. Curious to know more? Check out the link in our show notes.